Thank you and good afternoon. I hope everybody's still awake. I don't need to make you stand up and do a couple of jumping jacks or anything. The topic for the panel is the presidential election and its implications on U.S. policy in the Middle East. I guess before we get to the implications, we kind of have to think about who's going to be the next president. Will the next president in any way affect the policies in the Middle East? Are we facing certain existential challenges for our parties, our two-party system? I guess at the end of the day, the most important question is there any light at the end of the tunnel? To help us navigate through these complex issues, we have this afternoon a panel of, the best word I could use for those guys are big guns. It really does give me a great honor to introduce our panelists this afternoon, and I would highly recommend that you do a little reading on their biographies in the books. The first panelist that I would like to invite up here is His Excellency Maen Areikat. Yes, I'm going to invite you all one by one so they can clap for you as you come up. The second big gun, I understand, is Mr. Khalil Jahshan. And the last but not least, by all means, is Dr. James Zogby. Did I say it was an honor to introduce those guys? Dr. Zogby, how are you? Good to see you. Who's who? His Excellency Maen Areikat. Maen is the chief representative of the General Delegation of the Palestine Liberation Organization. He's been serving in that capacity here in Washington, D.C., if I'm not mistaken, since 2009. Before 2009, between 1998 and 2009, he was associated, or Ambassador Areikat served in various capacities at the Negotiations Affairs Department of the PLO in Ramallah, where he worked with President Abbas, among others. And before then, and that's how I remember him really when I was younger, he was at the Orient House. And back then he was working with a very good friend of the family, the late Faisal Husseini. Second panelist is Mr. Khalil Jahshan. He's the executive director of the Arab Center, Washington, D.C., which is a think tank on U.S. policy in the Middle East. It is a great organization. I have known Mr. Jahshan for many years, where he served in various capacities in Washington, but I've always known him to be a lecturer on international affairs and Middle East policies. And Dr. Jim Zogby is the last but not least. He is the co-founder and president of the Arab American Institute. He is also a member of the executive committee of the Democratic National Committee. He is often featured on both national and international media as a expert on Middle East affairs. But he also is known to advise certain administrations, including the Obama administration, on various issues related to the Middle East. So without further ado, gentlemen, it gives me great honor to have you address, is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Start and go.
Oh, you gotta go first.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just following the order of the schedule. So,
Okay.
Mr. Areikat.
Thank you, Elias. It's an honor to be here with two distinguished gentlemen, one to my right and one to my left. And I believe that
Politically or?
both, politically, socially, what have you. And I think I am here also to listen to both of them, because I always valued their comments and their remarks. In my case, I'm going to talk from a political point of view about Palestinians and our expectations. I remember ever since I was a little child that people in my country always paid so much attention to what is happening in the United States, the elections in the United States, you know, who's going to win, what's going to happen. And every time, at least in the 70s, new elections were held, always it was, expectations were always high that the new administration will do a reassessment or a reevaluation of its policies in the Middle East vis-a-vis the Arab-Israeli conflict. 40 years later, unfortunately, what we have gotten used to is a routine cycle every year, at least in regard to the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We have not seen any fundamental change at all since, I would say, the United States started talking officially to the PLO and to the Palestinians. And this, in addition to the fact that this is an extremely interesting election, thanks to the presence of Donald Trump in it, I believe that the Palestinian issue is not even on the agenda. I mean, both candidates are competing to win the pro-Israel votes in this country. Even Trump, who started early by saying he wants to be neutral, has shifted because some of his donors now, or one major donor, Sheldon Adelson, asked him to support Jerusalem as being the united and eternal capital of Israel, and pushed him to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu in New York. And then on the other side, we see Haim Saban, who is also a strong supporter of Hillary Clinton, and both agree on one thing in this country: to crush any criticism, to silence any criticism or any efforts taken by anyone in this country to criticize Israeli policies, and they're willing to invest millions and millions of dollars to do that. So are we at all having any expectations? No. Do we expect anything to change if either candidate wins? No. And this, again, brings us to the most important issue. I personally, and after spending 7 years in this country, have reached a conclusion that nothing is going to change here unless a very strong grassroots effort is started to bring pressure from the base or from bottom up. I don't believe that any administration, Democratic or Republican, is going to deal firmly with Israel, hold Israel accountable, and allow us, at least, if they don't want to do anything, hands off. Let us deal with Israel. We will deal with Israel, not militarily, not through violence. We will deal with them through international law, international organizations, United Nations Security Council. If the United States does not want to do anything, leave it to us. We will handle the Israelis. However, unfortunately, they are not doing anything, and they don't want us to do anything. And therefore, to conclude, I am watching it for the fun of it, but honestly, I do not expect any breakthroughs regardless of who the winner is. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias. I'd like to thank Ratib and HCEF for the invitation to participate in this panel and get to see many friends we've met over the years who are very active in the cause of peace in the Holy Land. So we appreciate all the efforts all of you do day in, day out, without tiring for so many years. We appreciate your efforts. The question that Elias asked, is there light at the end of the tunnel? I'm not sure there is light at the end of the tunnel as much as there is a tunnel at the end of the light, I think. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. I think we have to go through a rather dark tunnel for a while until something changes, most probably on the ground. I agree with Maen with regards to what needs to be done here, grassroots-wise, but there also has to be some change, some shift in the paradigm and on the ground in general in the Holy Land, in Palestine and in Israel, because the impediment in a way has shifted, I think, over there. It's still here, but it has also shifted to the parties in the region. HCEF staff, in their description, if you look at your program and in their description of this panel, indicated that basically the U.S. does have strategic goals to promote an extensive national interest to protect in the Middle East. These goals and interests are clear to everybody who observes this region, and that's why they have attracted the attention of the presidential candidates themselves, their respective parties, as we have seen during the national conventions, the media that covers them, and there has been, at least in looking back at the stuff the last few days to kind of gather some thoughts for these remarks, at least 150 articles that I have Googled on the impact of the elections on Middle East policy. So there has been a lot of coverage indeed, but also I think on the part of the American public itself at large, which will in the final analysis determine the outcome of these elections on November 8th. I almost said 28, but we haven't changed it. He said 28, but they are still on the 8th. But for his supporters, we do encourage him to vote early and not a minute before the 28th. Okay. At this kind of late stage in the process, in the electoral process, I think it's safe to assume that there will be, and I disagree with many analysts both here and particularly in the Middle East, who see these things as an exercise, our elections, as an exercise in futility. It might be an exercise in futility in terms of the significance or the depth of the differences on the Middle East between the two candidates. But I beg to differ in the sense that there will be some difference. There will be some serious differences de facto. It's not related to what they have said during the campaigns, and it's not related to what they have said even career-wise, although one of the candidates doesn't have a career at all politically, at least that we can point to and say that's where he stood historically on this conflict. So as a result, the candidates have focused extensively, but I wouldn't say substantively, on foreign policy issues throughout the campaign, of course, including the Middle East. Most of the focus, though, has been on issues beyond Arab-Israeli issues and definitely beyond the Palestine question. I think this year 2016, with regards to the election, the question of Palestine is generally marginalized compared to other issues. There are other issues on our plate as a country, and they have taken over probably the bulk of the area on the plate, whether it's global terrorism or the need to defeat specifically ISIS and its threat, bilateral relations with Iran, particularly in light of the agreement with Iran over the nuclear program, the special relationship with Israel as evidenced through the almost $40 billion deal that was just agreed to between Washington and Tel Aviv, bilateral relations with traditional Arab allies, particularly in the Gulf, who are upset with some of these policies. And way down the list, the Palestine question has been relegated to kind of like one of the bottom 2 or 3 items on the agenda of the United States at this time. Even issues like Iraq and Libya and Yemen and what have you seem to be higher on the list of priorities at this time. Foreign policy, particularly U.S. policy toward the Middle East, given the region's level of instability and volatile situation, I think will remain significant on the agenda of the next administration. I'm not concerned about what they have said in the campaign and what attention they have given it thus far. I have a feeling, as a student of the Middle East for the past 40 years, and I assume my colleagues here would agree with me, the region tends to impose itself on the agenda of a superpower like the United States that has so many extensive interests in the region, like it or not. It will come back to haunt us one way or the other. And just look at the events of the past 10 years. Nobody anticipated these events, not Arab Spring or Arab Autumn, the way it turned into something totally different. It will come back and assert itself on everybody's agenda, whether we like it or not. Now, the two candidates, with all due respect, have not given us a lot of serious thought in terms of what they want to do in the region, particularly in regard to the issue that brings us together today, the issue of Palestine and the issue of Israel-Palestine peace. Clinton and Trump agree on some perennial aspect of what is called Middle East policy. In general, they both want to pursue some tactics to combat, agree on the tactics they want to use to combat ISIS in Syria. They talk about airstrikes. They talked about intelligence gathering. They talk about partnership with local allies in the Arab region. However, it's easier to kind of understand Clinton a bit because she's had a visible track record both as a candidate. She has really published early on all kinds of policy papers that give you an idea as to where she's coming from. And before that, of course, as a senator and as a first lady, and even before that, Jim and I are familiar with her political activism long before she came on the national scene, particularly in Palestine. Very few people know that she was involved in supporting particularly women NGOs in Palestine long before she became a national figure. And as a matter of fact, she was attacked on the basis of that as she kind of graduated from one political position to another, people accusing her of being too close and too biased to extremist, leftist, particularly organizations. Where we stand today, last night, we had an event yesterday, a whole day event at the Arab Center that involved experts talking about democracy in the Middle East and the Obama legacy or lack thereof. And one of the speakers was Peter Beiramee, whom you see a lot on TV, and he's relatively close to some people in the administration and to the Clinton campaign. He mentioned a very interesting line that attracted my attention and the attention of so many at the conference yesterday. He said Obama started his presidency wanting to be a Carter and ended up being a Nixon. And he speculated that, from his perspective, that Clinton would most probably be a Reagan light in terms of some of these issues, including the Palestine issue. So, like I said, we've heard a lot from Clinton, but nothing to assure us that there is either a serious recommitment to a serious peace process. We haven't seen anything that would challenge Israeli violations of international law and even American law with regards to settlements, with regards to any of these issues that are dear to us on the Arab-Israeli conflict. Yet I warn everybody against assuming that and giving up and saying that both candidates are one and the same and nothing is going to happen. I think there are going to be some differences and there are going to be some surprises. Thank you.
Dr. Zogby. Dr. Zogby.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm an annual fixture at this event, Ratib, and my degree of optimism declines with every year. There's kind of a depreciation rate that I think sometimes accelerates. But I find, nevertheless, a way forward. The light only exists at the end of the tunnel if you yourself help light it. It does not we're not moving toward a goal that someone else sets. It's a goal that we need to create. And so I agree with Maen that on two fronts, and I want to discuss both, the region itself and the politics here. I was, as you might know, I worked with Bernie Sanders. I was his representative on the platform drafting committee. And while Palestine may not figure large in the campaign now, it certainly dominated our discussions during the platform debates. And that taught me, and I think should teach us all a lesson, that it's an issue when you make it an issue. It's an issue when you mobilize significant enough political force to make political leadership deal with it. And let me say the following, that we didn't win all the big stuff, but we did win language in the platform that cannot be denied. Not just, one of my proudest moments was getting abolished the death penalty in the platform. That never existed in the platform before. I was actually surprised that we shamed them into it. I was pleased that we got the public option in the platform. We fought like hell for a tax on carbon emissions, and we got it. We fought for the $15 minimum wage, and we moved them far along the way on that. And on Palestine, I was surprised that the debate focused on the word occupation and the word settlement. It reminded me, because I went up against Wendy Sherman, who was representing Hillary's campaign, and she and I had been the two opposite sides in the 1988 Jackson Dukakis, and it was kind of funny to be in the same place with the same person on the other side, again fighting over a word. But the word that we fought over in '88 was what they called the P word, which they didn't want in the platform because it had never been there before. And this time it was settlements and occupation, but the P word was all over the place, Palestine. And if you go back and read platforms, if you read platforms up to 2016, the only time that Palestinian state ever got mentioned was in 2004 after Bush agreed to it. And in 2004, 2008, and 2012, the way that a Palestinian state was mentioned was as necessary to preserve Israel as a Jewish democracy. That's how it got mentioned. And then immediately after mentioning it, there would be caveats, like it would be a demilitarized Palestinian state, or it would be a place where we would negotiate whether refugees would go to it or not, or it would have conditions placed on it. It was a subordinate issue to Israel. Because they knew we were going to make a fight, they preempted our concerns by using two different formulas. One was Palestinians deserve the right to freedom and independence and dignity in their own state. And the second was another mention of dignity and independence. It was in there twice, in about 4 sentences. It was the first time that Palestinian rights got mentioned as something on their own. And the only reason it was done was in part to preempt our opposition and a recognition of the fact that we had created a significant enough political movement within the party that it could not be ignored as an issue. I raised opposition to BDS. The language of BDS was in the platform, that we opposed the delegitimization of Israel, including the BDS movement. I wanted it stricken. Wendy came back and she said, well, let me be clear, she said, we're not opposed to BDS. we're only opposed to BDS efforts that seek to end the state of Israel. And I said, oh, I could go with that. I mean, in other words, they were sort of placing the condition and then taking the condition away, interpreting it our way because they knew that they couldn't win the fight their way. So before I sort of write the obituary for the Clinton administration's Palestine policy, let me just suggest to you that it will go nowhere if we go nowhere. If we don't light the light, if we don't keep the pressure on, and Bernie has been very clear on this. He asked me to be on the board of the new group that he's formed, which is to be a pressure. We've had several meetings, and our goal is going to be we win the election in November, and then we fight like hell January on to make sure that what we won in the platform and the goals that we set during the campaign become part of America's agenda. This will not happen on its own. Because if I'm a politician, I seek the path of least resistance. The point is to give them resistance sufficient enough that they simply have to. I've been doing this for way too many years now. I remember, hearing you say what you say. Without getting into any other of your colleagues, I had a debate with one of your colleagues about 30 years ago at a Bethlehem convention here. And all he wanted to talk about was the UN and 140 votes to 3 votes, and we keep losing the 3 votes, and we're going to go back to the UN for another vote this fall. I was like, man, when do you not understand that the issue is not the 143 to 3? The issue is the one in that 3 that you have to change. The goal is here. We have to do the change work here. And frankly, the other side's fighting like hell. And yeah, they got Sheldon Adelson, and they got Chaim Saban, and they got whoever's guys giving money. We got people with money. Our people don't give. Our people don't work. Our people don't fight like hell. And they do. And if one side fights and the other side doesn't, guess who wins? And what Bernie provided us, what Jackson provided us 3 decades ago, was a vehicle for that fight. But we have to be central to that fight. We have to be a part of that fight. Because even the progressive movement, if we're not in it, has no reason. They got enough other issues to worry about without us. We have to be the people who push that issue forward. And I'm not optimistic, but I'm not pessimistic either, because we still have a way forward. Now, secondly, on the region itself. And with all due respect, after 16 years of neglect, 8 by the Bush administration, neglected it, and the Obama administration, which set the right goals, but did not understand the use of political pressure domestically and internationally to make those goals a reality. I remember one time the president said to me, he said, I think their expectations were too high when explaining Arab disappointment. I said, no, Mr. You set the goal. You're the one who created the expectations. I didn't go to Cairo, you did. You didn't say, I'm going to change Washington, change America, and change the world. I mean, I didn't say that, you did. They didn't set the expectations, you created them and then let them down. I mean, good words do not deliver change. Work delivers change, and we didn't do the work. America did not do the work to make this happen. And every time there was an obstacle in their way, Netanyahu would say no, they'd back off. And so 8 years later, you basically could say neglect. Now, in 16 years of neglect, let's understand, there has been an atrophying on the Palestinian side and a muscling up on the Israeli side. 2 pathologies have set in. One, I call it the spoiled child syndrome. Israelis know bad behavior never gets punished. So why not? Just be as bad as you can and know that you're going to get whatever you want. He fought against the Iran deal. He got rewarded for it. Where's the need to change? And on the Palestinian side, what has happened in 16 years is a pathology of the other sort, the abused child syndrome, which in effect says, I'm never going to get anything good, so why bother even trying? Or I can be bad and nobody's going to punish me, or nobody's going to do anything but punish me if I'm good or bad, so why bother? And there has been the Palestinian side at this point is so completely dysfunctional, politically dysfunctional, sorry. It's my opinion. I had a roommate in college, he used to say, he was from Brooklyn, he used to say, I'm a human and I can emote if I want to. And so the point is, there was a time when we would identify what the Palestinian strategy was, what the Palestinian vision was. The vision is atrophied, the strategy is atrophied, and there's no movement. They've become a dependency on international aid, and there's no forward, there's no push. The mass movement of resistance that would mobilize and challenge the conscience of the world is absent at this point. And I read the daily reports. I mean, your office does an extraordinary job in sending out these daily reports. If the Washington Post has a story about an Israeli being killed, there are at least a dozen or more stories every day from villages across the West Bank, from refugee camps, of horrific human rights abuses occurring. Provocations. Talk about incitement. That's where the incitement's happening. It happens every day, not in words, but in behaviors that have sucked the life and created fury in a generation of young Palestinians. And yet, where's the leadership channeling that into a movement? You are absolutely right, though, that when you say that this issue will be front and center when the region makes it front and center, and what will make it front and center is when the Palestinians make it front and center. And I know, and you know, that as long the U.S. is talking about, Syria, and they're talking about this, the minute there is a mass movement that disrupts the situation in the West Bank and Gaza, Palestine will be number one on the agenda of the world conscience. Just as a little movement of political people in America made the entire focus almost of the Democratic Party platform be Palestine, right? I mean, a movement in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, I hope it's not another silly rocket mess from Gaza, but a movement that challenges Israel will, in fact, eclipse all those other issues, making Palestine number one front and center, because it remains the centerpiece of Arab thinking. Arabs want to dismiss it, but the minute it erupts, it becomes number one again. And so the challenge is for us in the States to change American politics, and for Palestinians to assert once again their issue by creating enough momentum in the region that it focuses us again, focuses the Clinton administration on the issue, making them address it. Done. Thank you.
Since His Excellency did not use all 15 minutes, you may.
No,
have
I
few
wanted to
moments
be
for
short
rebuttal.
to get, but these are very interesting comments from both my colleagues on the right and on the left, whom I respect very much. But let me first of all just comment quickly. When I said the grassroots here, Jim, I meant like an orchestrated, organized effort by all those who support the Palestinian cause and the Arab cause in the United States. And I didn't get into the details of that because of our past experiences with efforts in that direction. And I still believe that change has to be made here, because no matter what we do there, yes, there are two different analysis of the situation. One, Jim provided that the Palestinians, and namely the Palestinian leadership, is not doing enough to put the Palestinian issue at the forefront. However, if you all recall, 2 years ago, we went to the United Nations, 3-4 years ago, and the Americans succeeded in undermining our efforts the first time around in 2011. Then we went in 2012 to the UN General Assembly, and we achieved our objective of being a non-member state. It's not a full member state, but it was a moral victory for us. Not much has changed because Israel continued to control the situation on the ground. But it's not fair. It's not fair to only expect the Palestinians who are under occupation, limited in resources. You know how many fronts we are fighting on at the same time? We have an internal front. We have a front with Israel. We have a front with Gaza. We have front with our neighbors. We have front with this big country. And then we have a front with our Arab brothers as well, who, as we speak, have been cutting off aid to the Palestinian people and to the Palestinian Authority. We have not been receiving a single penny from any Arab country for the last 6 months, with the exception of Algeria. Okay? The international community pledged 1.2 billion. 400 billion has already been delivered. Sometimes I wonder how our people are functioning. So it's not fair to only expect the Palestinians to do that. When I sit in meetings here and my colleagues from different Arab countries try to convince me to convince my leadership not to go to the UN Security Council, we don't want to pick a fight with the Americans right now. If you know the Americans are going to veto that, why should you go? Come on, guys. I mean, we don't need the headache, in other words. Okay? So we don't have the depth, because now this idea that's being promoted that the Palestinians have not done enough. We have accepted what we call the historical compromise, 20% of what used to be historic Palestine, independent state, West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem capital, 194 for the refugee to resolve the Palestinian refugee problem. This is the maximum we managed. This is the maximum we can give. However, Israel and the United States wants us to offer more. And unfortunately, there are other partners in the region and elsewhere who are asking us to be more accommodating. And it is because we are not being accommodating, we are being punished for that reason. So how many fronts can the Palestinians fight on? It's not fair. Yes, we want our cause to be on the top of the agenda. It's not us. It's not us who deferred it and who put it at the end of the agenda. It's all the mess that is going on in the region, the mess that was created by some of the countries of the region, and the peoples of the region are paying the price for that, including us. Thanks God we are paying a political price, not a human price like in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and elsewhere where countries are shattered and destroyed beyond recognition. So, we are up against very, very tough challenges and tasks. And I want people here to understand that although we want to make to create that momentum, we cannot do it alone. We need the support of our Arab countries and our allies around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Being a lawyer, I love the 5 words or less summary. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but budget cuts often force us to turn it off. I'm going to open the panel to questions from the floor. So if anybody has any questions, I would love to hear them.
We've heard a pretty dire situation. I would add, though, I just want to give you one link of hope and then a question. The hope is there's a hell of a lot of Jews that are sick and tired of the craziness of the Israeli government, which is insane. Their policy makes no sense. The Jewish people know it. An awful lot of Jewish people know it. And I know a lot of Jewish people that think it's crazy. There's a movement worldwide, started out of Israel, called SISO, which is Save Israel, Stop the Occupation. The whole idea being to go towards next year when it's 50 years. And they've signed up J Street and all these organizations, the Jewish diaspora. So I think that's number one. We ought to keep that in mind, that there are significant Jewish I don't know so much in Israel. I know there is a dissident, significant dissident. So we ought to keep that in mind, especially when we talk in the United States, because we have Jewish allies here in the United States, and we should not forget that. My question is, we have, and we've seen in this conference, hundreds of churches throughout the United States, denominations of all sorts. Can the Arab leadership here sit down and talk with the head of Bishop Olson and Steve Kalecki, and what can the bishops do in terms of this? Talking about Metropolitan Joseph, collect the leaders and develop a slogan, Palestinians for Peace, and march under that slogan here in the United States. Because I think there's elements there to do it. Thank you. Your thoughts?
Good, thank you.
I very much agree with you that engaging the American Jewish community in this country is very important. I am a strong proponent, and I do urge always my community to reach out to American Jewish communities and talk to them, because especially the younger generation, you know, and the ones who are living every day with, you know, with Palestinians, with Arabs, with Muslims, with Christians, with Sikh, with everybody. You know, they were all brought up on respecting the fundamental principles of this country, and they are not ideologically committed to supporting Israel like their fathers and their grandparents, and they believe in the principle of equality and justice. Many of them are even involved in all these movements, Students for Justice in Palestine, BDS. Many of them are members of the American Jewish community. And we should not be shy in reaching out to them and talking to them, because they are an important element in making the changes in this country. As for the Christian outreach, I always, and Ratib just stepped out, I think what he is doing in terms of this gathering is very important. And listening to, help me with the name of the one, yes, talking yesterday that I was born in Syria, educated in Lebanon, raised in the United States, but Palestine is my heart and my soul. You know, I told him today that was so impactful, you know, I mean, and for someone, for a man who represents God, to be able to say that, you know, he said it's not politics. I said, I know. You're talking about justice. You're talking about equality. God advocated that. You have to fight for that. And I always tell my Palestinian Christians that the version, the story here is distorted. And it is your task to reach out to different Christian congregations in this country to counter the pro-Israel evangelicals narrative in this country. And, you know, it is important to continue to reach out to them in order to explain to them the suffering of the Palestinian people there, and the fact that they don't need to support Israel in order for the Messiah to come back or to reappear or whatever.
Speed them up. We are, fully aware of the new trends in the Jewish community. We are in contact. We appreciate that effort, particularly among young people. To me, it's amazing to see this new generation in a surprising way, taking the lead, for example, in some of these so-called most radical of projects right now from the perspective of the mainstream Jewish community, which is BDS. I'm not exaggerating by saying, as far as my own personal knowledge of this movement, probably more than 60% of its activists on campuses in this country tend to be of Jewish background. They're the majority, or at least they are the most visible, let me put it this way, and the most effective. And we appreciate that, and we will continue to work with them to expand that section or strata within the Jewish community. Churches is a different challenge. I as a Christian Arab, I've been involved with churches in this country for many years. I have served on the board of different churches for Middle East Peace and others. I participated in lobbying with major church leaders over the years in Congress and meetings with the White House. And the challenge, let me just summarize it. I don't want to take too much time in answering this question, but a senator one time told me after a meeting with church leaders in which I participated, he said, your friends, after the group left the room, your church friends need to translate their good sentiment and moral position into votes and dollars. This is the way these politicians look at these things. So we go there, we make them feel guilty, we convince them morally that they need to change the policy. But we're not a political movement yet as churches. We do not have the impact. We have a moral impact. We need to continue to use it. But at one point, it has to translate itself into a political weight.
Any other questions?
Sorry, Elias. How do we, from your perspective, how do we help assist our Palestinian friends here in the United States who have the financial resources but have gotten into a sense of defeatism, that it's gone, and therefore I'm making my life here in the United States and I'm breaking the connection? How do you suggest, from your perspective, that we assist them?
It's interesting.
It's a challenge. And it's one that it's one that I've confronted literally all my life. I started the Palestine Human Rights Campaign in 1977. And I think we created a bit of momentum and excitement, and people were given money. I mean, enough that we actually had a viable organization for 4 years until I left and started ADC. I'm rather convinced that there are currents that are developing, and we find ourselves in the middle of them, trying to put the pieces together to create a movement that will re-energize them. I think Bernie did some of that, what he convinced us of was the fact that the pieces were there, that the pieces could be we've been working with J Street. We do an event a year with them. We do a couple of events a year with Americans for Peace Now, and we have an ongoing project with Jewish Voice for Peace. They don't all get along together, but we work with each of them and find them important vehicles in their own right for what they do. The problem is on our end. It's on our community's end. Is that it's harder to when I watch Jewish Voice for Peace having exploded the way it did in a relatively short period of time. I wonder why our community's Hanna here. Hanna, yeah. I mean, he has been struggling for, ever since I've known him when he was in college, to try to create some vehicle out of the Palestinian little organizations and fuse them together into a large one. I think he's done some work, but not at the rate. I always argue about all of our organizations, right? We're too small for the challenge we have, which is too big. But we're doing stuff, and I think we're doing some good stuff, and we just don't support these groups. We work with them all. And I think we've actually done some stuff. I mean, I think our work at the Democratic Convention, in the hall, outside the hall, the forums that we did, the press we got, the focus on the issue that we were able to generate, the number of delegates who weren't Bernie delegates who ended up supporting us on the floor with signs and whatever, I think that was part of a movement that is still there and ready to continue to grow. And just... my point is that I understand the diplomatic strategy of the authority. I understand the UN effort and all that. I just think that what will accelerate our movement here, I remember the first Intifada, I still have a picture in my office of me getting arrested at the Israeli embassy in the middle of that. And there was an energy that created for us. I don't want to ask the weakest party to do the heaviest lifting. I don't want to do that. And I resent the fact when America asks the Palestinians to make the big concessions, it's the oppressor that makes the concessions. But I do think that some momentum on the Palestinian side on the ground, real people doing real things. I mean, these demonstrations against the wall take place, but they need to have a more visible component to them. I keep thinking of if there were only a mass movement, nonviolent movement that could challenge the conscience, Palestinians going to the borders of Jerusalem saying, "Let my people in," something that would sort of create a momentum that would help us, help them, and create this synergy that we need for us to change the dynamic and accelerate that change.
May I just add just
go
a
ahead.
couple of sentences? First of all, I think it's important also to keep things in perspective historically. When we look, for example, at this recent phenomenon that I mentioned and Jim just mentioned, which is very encouraging, Jewish Voices for Peace, let's say. It's a recent phenomenon, in a way, but it is the product of 120, 130 years of Jewish activism in this country. It's only the latest phase of that. So it's kind of like the maturing, if you will, of a sector within the Jewish community based on that long history of experience. That's missing on the Arab American side. But I did mention one aspect in terms of what we could do, like let's say churches translating their moral position into some kind of a political pressure point on officials, which is very difficult and requires, it actually, once you do that, maybe even the support within the churches will diminish because we don't agree on a lot of things within the church. We agree on general principles, but not necessarily on the detail, especially when you turn it into a political campaign. But there are many things, basic things. You really don't have to be so sophisticated in energizing the passive, if you will, Palestinian American or Arab American community in general, because the issue is psychological. The issue is malaise right now, because discouragement over the lack of leadership maybe from the region and the lack of clarity from the region compared to the past. So the answer is also psychological, just being there. Being there. I'll tell you honestly, and I probably Jim would agree with me, one of our main impediments as Arab Americans, having worked like Jim for many years in this field, is lack of involvement. I mean, why is it that the 3.5 million Arab Americans, we do not have, we are half the size of the Jewish community of 5.9 million, okay, almost. And why don't we have half their influence? And one of the answers is lack of involvement. When I have 200 Jewish groups larger than the largest of our organizations because of involvement, I can count, millions, 2 million Jews that are active in organizations that represent their interest in this country. I cannot get even one, instead of 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 6, I cannot get 1 out of 3 Arab Americans. We've never been able to gather or mobilize the resources of more than 100,000 Arab Americans, really, realistically, in this country in terms of active members and supporters. So that has been the dilemma. So you being there and encouraging particularly the immigrant community to make a difference, be involved, because they do not come here or immigrate from democratic countries, and they need a little nudging to understand that their vote or their voice has some impact in this country. So just you as their neighbor and as their friend, frankly, when they say, this person is not from Palestine, yet he's involved in Palestine. they might be encouraged to kind of emulate or follow you.
Mr.
A Q story follow-up on that, about the
Briefly,
immigrants voting.
We only have 3 more minutes left.
At our institute, we do a program, Yellow Vote, and we do voter registration projects, and we do get out the vote rallies. And several years ago, I was in Cleveland, and the plain dealer reporter came to me and he said, do you have to do these events because your people come from countries where people don't vote? And I said, no, we do them because my people came to a country where people don't vote. And actually, in all of our work, we find that our turnout is higher than most other communities, in part because we have actually done some really good work in encouraging. I chair the Ethnic Council in the Democratic Party, and frankly, you may not believe it, but our Arab American component in terms of delegates we elect and state leadership roles, posts we hold, is higher than most other ethnic communities. We do not compare with the Jewish community at all. That's, that's like, comparing me with, I was going to say Robert Redford, but he looks like hell these days.
All right, Al Pacino.
No, I'm,
Ambassador Areikat, yeah.
you get the point. I mean, that's another league that they're in. But in terms of, the Polish, the Ukrainians, we do damn well. We're doing really well at this game of politics. And Bernie saw it, understood it, and I didn't get the job because of my pretty face. I got the job because it was a community that he'd learned to count on, and that he knew actually made a difference in politics, and we actually do. We elected a bunch of we had elected more delegates percentage-wise than most other ethnic communities did.
Just quick clarification on the involvement of many members of the American Jewish community in BDS on Jewish Voice for Peace. I think there is growing concern on the part of the American Jewish community here of the direction Israel is taking right now, and you read that all the time. They are concerned about the future of Israel. They are concerned about the policies of the current Israeli government. They believe it's pushing to a one binational state. They are talking about the demographic balance. They are afraid that Israel, continuing on this path, does not have a chance to survive and exist 10, 20, 50 years down the road. So one big reason they are doing what they are doing, calling for the end of the occupation, the separation between the two peoples, is because they believe this is the best guarantee for the survival of the state of Israel. So they are doing it also because out of concern for Israel, which is a welcome thing, because we want to end the occupation. We are not telling them not to continue. I just wanted to explain that. The other thing is why the community here and why we have failed. Back in the 70s and the 80s, yes, Jim is right. There was the Palestinian cause was the source of mobilization. Everybody would rally around it. But somehow we ended up becoming organizations representing different countries. And we imported the political differences that were taking shape in the Middle East to the point that we started to fight amongst ourselves, get funded by different sources, and we forgot that there is a common issue that brings us around it. And look at the Israeli organizations that Khalil mentioned, 200, 300. They fight among themselves. They curse each other. But when it comes to Israel, you don't even find one, not even Jeremy Beiramee, who is a good friend of mine and whom I am making a trip to the Northwest next week on Tuesday. We jointly visiting 3 cities in the Northwest for the first time ever, a representative of the PLO. And I know I'm going to come under attack from my fellow Palestinian community, but they can say whatever they can say. I need to further the cause of my people here. And they are a legitimate partner for us as long as they call for end of occupation, end of settlement. They are lobbying the Treasury Department to cut off aid to organizations that finance and fund settlements in the Middle East. They are more influential than us as Palestinian Americans in this country. So, we need to leave our differences back in the Middle East. We need to create that common denominator where Jim, Khalil, Maen, everybody here can rally and work for the same cause. And that is one reason why in the last 20 years we have, and the Palestinian internal situation didn't help either. The divisions, Oslo, what have you, it all disappointed and disillusioned our community. So there is a frustration, disillusionment on the part of our community, the Palestinian American, but yet we have to leave those differences back there and focus here on the battle in the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador. Albeit we have one more question, but I'm gonna hear the question briefly, gentlemen. If I did this in court, the judges would admonish me, just for the record. So I get to admonish you now but briefly,
Hi,
what's your last
listening
question?
to you, it made me think of something else I wanted to say, and that is, I know that it's difficult right now for elections to take place in Palestine. One thing I would like to say about that is I'd sure like to see a lot more women involved, because people talk about women going on and on about stuff. I think many women can actually say what you said in a more succinct way. I'm not saying that to be offensive to you, but I just think that Palestine has a huge resource that's not really tapped as much as it should be, and that's the women and the young people. And the other thing that I actually wanted to say is nobody has really touched on the media and the fact that now we have, whenever an issue is being discussed, say with a Hispanic issue or a Muslim, not a Muslim issue, sorry, black issue, women's issue, any of these issues, they wouldn't dare have a panel talking about that didn't have at least one representative from that group. There are, I can't even count on any fingers. I've seen Jim on television periodically, not often enough. I've seen Maen on television, not often enough, that there's no Palestinian to speak for Palestine. And I have to say, as things were going on, I'm all for referring to Palestine as the Holy Land. But frankly, as I was sitting here listening to people not want to say Palestine, to say, keep saying the Holy Land is another way that we're sweeping ourselves under the rug. I think Palestine needs to be said as often as possible. Holy Land is great, and I appreciate our place as the Holy Land, but I'd like to hear Palestine said a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I guess the 5 words or less again is we have to turn on the light, and then there might be a light, but budget cuts will still turn it off. And what's in the best interest of the United States and Israel is ending the occupation in Palestine. Having said those things, brings this panel to a conclusion. Gentlemen, thank you so very much. And it was truly an honor to be hosting this panel. Thank you.